Canadian police are on the hunt for a missing woman. Though all indications suggest murder, they must rely on a single strand of animal hair to prove it. When an Ohio woman vanishes, suspicions swirl around her husband. What police lack is hard evidence. In Missouri, a man is found brutally murdered.
Doesn't look like it.
To catch his killer, police must piece together his final minutes. Sometimes, the murder suspect is immediately apparent, but the proof remains elusive. When there are no witnesses to speak for a victim, forensic scientists must transform the smallest clue into a material witness. Tucked away in the Gulf of St. Lawrence in the southeast corner of Canada lies the remote and sparsely populated Prince Edward Island. On October 7th, 1994, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or RCMP, responded to a complaint about an abandoned vehicle found on private property. When the constable arrived, he discovered the car resting a few hundred yards off a private road. No tags were present.
41 to base.
A check on the vehicle identification number revealed it was registered to a woman named Shirley Duguay.
Number IG4, AB69.
Police arranged to have the vehicle impounded and then began trying to track down the owner. But when the woman failed to return their calls, detectives decided to go to her address. There, they were met by Shirley Duguay's father and her children's babysitter. The news of the abandoned car concerned them. Shirley, they said, had not been heard from in some time. The babysitter said that she last saw the 32-year-old mother of 5 4 days earlier. Shirley was leaving to run some errands. She never mentioned where she was going. She said goodbye and promised to be back in a few hours. For RCMP Inspector Alphonse McNeil, the story had raised a troubling question.
We wondered why they didn't report her missing. They said that they were concerned that an ex-common law spouse by the name of Douglas Beamish, who she had had the three young children with, would end up getting the children if social services found out that she was missing or gone. So they tried to hold back that information as long as they could, hoping that they would find her.
For investigators, the time for waiting was over. Fearing that harm may have come to Shirley Duguay, police processed her abandoned vehicle for clues. What they found was not encouraging. Dozens of tiny reddish-brown stains tested positive for human blood. And barely visible bloodstain patterns found on the windshield and larger ones on the seats were consistent with having been caused by someone being punched or bludgeoned.
There was blood in the vehicle. Shirley Duguay had been missing for 4 days, so we were concerned that Shirley Duguay had met some form of demise in that vehicle.
Investigators returned to the area where the abandoned car had been found. For hours, the search for clues to the young woman's fate turned up nothing. Then, 500 meters from where the car was discovered, investigators found something. It was a pillow stained with what appeared to be blood. And a short distance away lay a blood-stained t-shirt. A shovel was also found nearby. all of the findings pointed to murder. And the shovel led police to believe that Shirley had likely been buried somewhere close by. But a thorough search failed to produce the victim's body. Now, police wanted to speak with the man who had the most to gain from her disappearance. Her ex-common-law husband and the father of 3 of her children. Doug Beamish admitted that he and Shirley's relationship had been troubled in the past. And he realized that her family probably blamed him for her disappearance. But he insisted he knew nothing about it. For the sake of the children, he and Shirley had managed to work out their problems. He said he last saw her a week or so earlier. He had been having car problems, and Shirley offered to give him a ride to a job site where he was employed as a construction worker. On the way there, they had a pleasant conversation about their kids and planned to speak more later. She then dropped him off at the site, and the two said goodbye. He hadn't heard from her since. Doug Beamish sensed that something was bothering Shirley. He speculated that she had left town to visit some friends in Toronto. But it turned out that no one there had heard from her in some time.
RCMP Inspector McNeil speaking.
Then, police got a call.
North End what?
A woman who had been following the case in the media believed she had important information.
This lady called and she said, I remember back around the time that Shirley Duguay went missing, I saw a car similar to hers on a road called the Allen Road, which would be about 20 kilometers away from where we found the car. I remember it was in the evening, it was dark. I saw 2 people on the side of the road, a tall man, a very small woman. They appeared to be arguing, and I just drove by, and I don't know if it's any good to you or not.
The woman couldn't be certain she had in fact seen Shirley Duguay. Still, the information was enough for police to search the area where the caller had seen the couple. But to cover the several square miles, they knew they needed help. Personnel from the Canadian Army agreed to participate in the search. For several days, their efforts turned up nothing. But then, they found something that seemed out of place.
One group came across a white plastic bag. We had a police officer with every group of searchers from the military. The police officer seized the bag.
The search of the area failed to produce any additional evidence. At the crime lab, examiners carefully removed the contents of the plastic bag. They recovered an old pair of white tennis shoes. There was also a large man's jacket stuffed inside. Several fibers and a single white hair were recovered. But further scrutiny revealed the presence of tiny stains that tested positive for human blood. Based on the information provided by the witness, police believed it had originated from Shirley Duguay. Now they needed to prove it. But there was a problem.
We didn't have Shirley Duguay, so we needed to be able to develop a DNA profile. The way we did that's what's called, in some cases, reverse paternity. We took a sample from her father, her brother, and her 2 sons.
Though everyone's DNA is unique, a genetic family resemblance exists among blood relatives. When the genetic profiles were compared, examiners concluded that the blood found on all of the evidence had originated from Shirley Duguay. Though the 32-year-old mother's whereabouts remained uncertain, all the evidence suggested she had been the victim of a violent crime. Police on Canada's Prince Edward Island continued searching for missing 32-year-old mother of 5, Shirley Duguay. Though efforts to find her had gone unsuccessful, authorities had found clues suggesting she had met with a violent fate. Among them was a man's jacket, found stained with blood, that had originated from Shirley. Looking for clues as to who might want to harm the young mother, officers from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police questioned Shirley's friends. They all believed that Shirley's ex-husband, Doug Beamish, was somehow involved in the disappearance. Recently, Shirley had started dating again. That had enraged her possessive and jealous ex-husband. And Doug Beamish had a history of violence.
When was the last time you saw those guys?
But the friend didn't recall if Beamish owned a jacket like the one found with Shirley's blood on it. Doug Beamish was emerging as the prime suspect in Shirley Duguay's disappearance.
Andre's down with the IN guys right now looking.
But so far, investigators had no physical evidence to prove it.
But, you know, without that jacket, being able to tie it to someone we don't have much. Andre, how did you make out with
Then they got a break.
We've got something. Identitors came back. They found some white cat hair on the inside of the jacket. And all I could think about all the way down here was Beamish and his white cat in his house.
That was all RCMP Inspector Alphonse McNeil needed to hear.
There's no doubt he's got them. We knew that he had a white cat and there were white hairs in the jacket. So the process then was to find a lab that could examine these if we were able to seize from blood from the cat.
With a warrant in hand, police and a local veterinarian returned to Doug Beamish's house. The suspect continued to deny any involvement in Shirley's disappearance and claimed that he didn't own a jacket like the one stained with her blood. Though it seemed like a long shot, authorities took possession of his cat, Snowball, hopeful they could somehow establish a genetic link to the hair found on the blood-stained jacket. Blood and hair samples were collected from Beamish's cat. But now, investigators had to find someone who was an expert in analyzing cat DNA. At the National Cancer Institute in Frederick, Maryland, they found one. There, biologist Dr. Stephen O'Brien has looked to the feline genetic code for help in medical research. When contacted, he agreed to help Canadian police. But Dr. O'Brien and his team never imagined that by cracking the feline genetic code, they might also help crack a baffling criminal case. The request to match a cat's DNA was unique in medical and legal history. First, examiners generated a genetic profile of the white hair pulled from the bloody jacket. Once completed, the results were then compared to the profile generated from the samples taken from Snowball.
What we discovered was that the genotype was identical to what we had seen in the jacket hair. So we were pretty sure that the jacket hair had come from a cat which had the same genotype as Snowball.
Though the scientists felt confident about the results, they could not be absolutely certain of them. It was possible that the few thousand cats roaming on the isolated Prince Edward Island shared a common ancestry. To find out, biologists needed to generate more DNA profiles of other cats on the island.
We had to determine what the status of the population was so that we could make the calculation of how likely it was that we were wrong in pronouncing a match.
Examiners went to work developing the genetic profiles of 20 randomly selected cats on the island. When O'Brien compared the results, he found that none shared a DNA signature similar to Snowball's. In fact, the odds that the hair found on the jacket had not come from Beamish's cat were 45 million to 1. Through Snowball, authorities had established a link between Doug Beamish and a jacket stained with his ex-wife's blood. But Inspector Alphonse McNeil wasn't satisfied.
Step it 1 foot at a time.
Next, he obtained a warrant to collect impressions of the suspect's feet.
Good. Step it 1 foot at a time.
Now, he hoped to tie the suspect to the pair of white running shoes found with the jacket.
We thought, well, if we can put those running shoes on the feet of Douglas Beamish somehow, that would be pretty solid evidence besides his cat.
Dr. Keith Bettles, a forensic podiatrist, received the evidence. He began by creating plaster casts of the suspect's feet in order to reveal all of the unique characteristics.
People's feet are unique because we walk on them all the time. We have lots of different stresses, lots of different forces on our feet. Feet are practically as individual as fingerprints.
The casts of Beamish's feet lined up perfectly with all of the wear patterns observed on the insoles of the white shoes. A single strand of cat hair and a discarded pair of shoes had given investigators the evidence they needed to implicate Doug Beamish in the disappearance of his ex-common-law wife.
It was right down there.
Then, 7 months after Shirley Duguay went missing, badly decomposed human remains were discovered buried in a remote wooded area.
Hey, how you doing? Oh, pretty good.
Dental records later confirmed that the victim was Shirley Duguay. And the medical examiner classified her death as a homicide. A short while later, Douglas Beamish was placed under arrest and charged with first-degree murder. Investigators believe that Beamish couldn't handle Shirley Duguay dating other men. Somehow, he manipulated her into giving him a ride in her car and directed her to a remote spot. Once there, he beat his ex-common-law wife to death. He then buried her body in a remote area and abandoned the car. Douglas Beamish was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. No place is immune from violent crime. And even the friendliest towns have their problems. Mansfield, Ohio has been called one of America's most livable cities, which makes what happened here all the more surprising. On January 2nd, 1990, a woman came in to speak with Mansfield police.
Yes, ma'am. What can I do for you?
She was concerned that something had happened to her friend, 44-year-old Noreen Boyle. When she last saw her friend a few days earlier, Noreen was shaken and visibly upset.
Of course, I don't know. I must have been in denial.
Her marriage of more than 22 years was falling apart.
I just didn't want to know.
And not only was her husband moving nearly 200 miles away to Erie, Pennsylvania, but he would likely take the couple's 2 children with him.
The hospital, they said.
Noreen was devastated.
We had lunch together at a Chinese.
When she tried to contact her, Noreen's husband, a prominent local physician, said Noreen had packed up and left town after a fight.
One time she said,
But the friend couldn't believe that Noreen would walk out on her 2 children.
she said, "Why?"
Mansfield police agreed to look into the case. And their first step was to question Noreen's husband, Dr. John Boyle. When Lieutenant David Messmore arrived at the residence, he learned that John Boyle was out of town.
Please have a seat and make yourself. May I offer you a...
John Boyle's mother explained that he had driven to Erie, Pennsylvania a few days earlier, where he was opening up his new medical practice. He was due back later that evening.
She just stormed out.
When questioned, she said that Noreen walked out on the family a few days earlier, and she was watching the couple's children until her son John returned home.
Excuse me.
The woman excused herself to check on the Boyles' baby daughter. Then, the couple's son approached the detective.
Something like this. My mom would never do something like this.
He said he was afraid something bad had happened to his mother. But before he could explain, his grandmother returned.
I'm really sorry. I have no more information.
When she saw what was happening, she ended the interview and asked the detective to
I
leave.
really have nothing more to tell you. I really need to have you leave.
The encounter troubled police,
He's from Mansfield.
and Lieutenant Messmore couldn't ignore that Dr. Boyle had left town around the same time his wife was reported missing.
I'm not sure where it's at or
But he soon learned that the reason for the doctor's trip to Pennsylvania checked out.
75597. He had been hired by a very large medical corporation in Erie, Pennsylvania. So he was basically traveling back and forth between Mansfield and Erie for some period of time.
But where was Noreen Boyle? Later that evening, Detective Messmore returned to the residence. His visit had been anticipated. Dr. Boyle's lawyer answered the door.
You represent Dr. Boyle?
I do.
Oh, okay. Is he home right now?
Well,
His client had in fact returned home from Pennsylvania. But because of the strain caused by the impending divorce, Dr. Boyle did not wish to discuss Noreen with police.
All right, well, I'll get with you later.
It wasn't the response investigators expected.
I was somewhat stunned that in the event of a missing person in your family, you would hire an attorney to represent you when there's no accusations or even any allegations of wrongdoing or even criminal matters involving the family. So that was certainly a very unusual situation.
I was not the only nurse.
To find out what Dr. Boyle might be trying to hide, police questioned his friends and co-workers.
Just recently began.
Started coming more frequently.
Professionally, all agreed Dr. Boyle had an impeccable reputation. But personally, he was known to be a womanizer and rumored to be involved in numerous affairs. In fact, one of his alleged mistresses was pregnant. And everyone speculated that the child belonged to Dr. Boyle. Though that made him a bad husband, it didn't mean he was capable of physical violence.
Appreciate you coming in.
In fact, only one person seemed to believe otherwise, and that was the Boyle son. Concerned for the child's well-being, Lieutenant Messmore caught up with him after school. The child was eager to tell his story. He said that the night before his mom disappeared, the sound of his parents arguing outside his bedroom woke him up.
I heard a big thump on the wall.
He heard a loud
And my
thud,
dad came,
and then there was
slowly in the room,
silence.
checking if I was sleeping.
A few seconds later, his dad peeked into his room. The boy was afraid and pretended to be asleep. The next morning, his mom was gone. His dad told him that she packed up and left, but he didn't believe his mom would leave without saying goodbye.
Did you have a conversation with your dad at all?
Though police had no evidence that a crime had been committed, they began to theorize that the noise heard by the child might have been the sound of his own mother being assaulted, or worse.
That's very unusual.
Police in Mansfield, Ohio continued their search for missing mother of two, Noreen Boyle. And now they theorized that her husband, Dr. John Boyle, was somehow involved. Though police had no hard evidence that a crime had taken place, they were able to obtain a warrant to search the Boyles' Ohio residence. Using luminol, a chemical that reacts to the proteins found in blood, technicians began scouring the house. but their efforts failed to turn up any evidence of a violent crime. Still, investigators persisted. To learn more, they contacted authorities in Erie, Pennsylvania, where Dr. Boyle was setting up his new medical practice.
Hi, Mill Creek Township Police Department.
Pennsylvania detectives tracked down a real estate agent there who had recently sold a house to Dr. Boyle and a pregnant woman who introduced herself as his wife. She recalled that Dr. Boyle was particularly interested in the home's concrete basement floor. He said he was eager to tear it up in order to build a playroom for his children.
Here, windows and
He offered to pay the asking price as long as he could take possession of the house immediately. The real estate agent turned over the sales agreement, which was signed by both the doctor and his wife. Pennsylvania authorities forwarded a copy to Mansfield Police Lieutenant David Messmore.
In that copy, it was noted that Dr. Boyle signed it, and also an N. Sherry Boyle. And checking further into the background, it was quite obvious that Noreen's name was not Sherry for a middle name.
Dr. Boyle had purchased the home with a woman pretending to be his wife. Investigators subpoenaed the suspect's most recent credit card statements. They learned that he had used his card to rent a jackhammer and to purchase indoor-outdoor carpeting and a load of concrete. Suddenly, all of the pieces were adding up.
I had the feeling and very strong suspicion that the body would be in that location.
Pennsylvania authorities issued a warrant to search the basement of Dr. Boyle's new home. Beneath some shelving and the indoor-outdoor carpeting, they found a badly poured patch of concrete. It was roughly the size of a makeshift grave. A crew was called in to dig up the concrete floor. After some time, they recognized the unmistakable smell of a decaying body. Then, a few feet down, they discovered a tarp. And inside were the badly decomposed remains of a human body. After carefully excavating the grave, the remains were transported to the medical examiner's office. A watch and other pieces of jewelry worn by the victim matched the description of those worn by Noreen Boyle. And dental records confirmed that the victim was, in fact, the 44-year-old mother of two. Noreen had been savagely murdered.
Looking for Dr. Boyle?
On January 26, 1990, almost a month after his wife disappeared, Dr. John Boyle was arrested in Ohio for suspicion of killing Noreen. Despite the evidence against him, the doctor maintained his innocence.
Okay, sir.
Someone was trying to frame him. That seemed ridiculous to investigators. But to ensure a conviction, they needed an eyewitness or physical evidence directly linking him to the homicide. And so far, they had neither. It was possible that Dr. Boyle could get away with murder. But then, nearly a week after Dr. John Boyle's arrest, a Mansfield, Ohio resident made a strange discovery. A pile of concrete had been dumped on the remote property. The field was nearly 200 miles away from where Noreen Boyle's body had been unearthed. But the man had followed the case in the media and thought there might be a connection. A crime scene technician was dispatched to the scene. After photographing the area, the concrete was collected into evidence. Police later determined that the property was owned by a close friend of Dr. Boyle's. the doctor had been there on numerous occasions. But to prove murder, police now needed to show that the concrete found in Ohio had originated in the suspect's Pennsylvania home. Police had found missing 44-year-old Noreen Boyle buried in the basement of her husband's new Pennsylvania home. Though investigators had a strong circumstantial case against her husband, they hoped a pile of concrete found in an Ohio field could physically link him to the murder. The samples collected from the field, along with concrete taken from the crime scene, were sent to CTL Engineering in Columbus, Ohio. There, lab supervisor Larry Piscitelli is an expert in analyzing the microscopic nature of rocks and concrete. Without being told where the individual samples had come from, he was asked to determine if any of the concrete pieces had originated from the same source. To analyze the internal structure of the concrete, the samples are cut into cross-sectional pieces using a diamond-tip saw. Once completed, the surfaces are smoothed and polished. Then, Piscitelli subjected the evidence to a high-powered microscope. Concrete is a mixture of stones, gravel, and sand, called aggregate, bound together by a cement paste and some trapped air. With the help of a computer, Piscitelli measures and counts each of these components. To the average eye, all concrete looks pretty much alike. But in fact, each chunk has a unique story.
Each piece of concrete is usually different because the components vary slightly. Even if they come from the same load of concrete, two different samples from the same truckload can be different because the percentages of the air voids, the small entrained or entrapped air voids, can be slightly different.
Piscitelli was unable to find significant similarities between most of the samples. But when he analyzed the results, he found that two of the pieces stood out from the rest. They shared the exact same number of unique components.
These two pieces of concrete had some unique characteristics that were peculiar just to those two pieces of concrete, and based on all the data and analysis, the numbers being exactly the same, I was able to show that those two pieces of concrete came from the same structure.
Of the two samples that matched, one had come from the pile of rubble found in Mansfield, Ohio. The other was collected in the basement of the suspect's new home in Erie, Pennsylvania. Police now had enough to charge Dr. John Boyle with murder. Police believe that John Boyle murdered his wife in the couple's home in order to start a new life with his pregnant mistress. After the kill, he drove her body to Pennsylvania and buried her in a grave he had dug in the basement of his new home. Investigators theorize he then returned to Ohio and dumped the leftover concrete on his friend's property. Dr. John Boyle was convicted of aggravated murder and abuse of a corpse. He was sentenced to 20 years to life. John Boyle thought he'd buried all evidence of his crime. But in fact, the trail of evidence spanned 200 miles. Other murders are more local, but the road to solving them can be just as long. In Harrison County, Missouri, on June 26, 1995, a farmer out for a walk noticed a foul odor. At first, he thought that maybe one of his livestock had died. But the reality was much worse. Hidden among some overgrowth lay the lifeless body of a man. After receiving the 911 call, dispatchers contacted officers of the Major Case Squad, a group of law enforcement personnel from several neighboring jurisdictions. Bethany Police Chief George Martz was among the first to respond to the scene.
We had no idea when we arrived who the victim was. There was no identification on the body that we were able to determine at that time.
But the manner in which he died was clear. He had been shot several times. Police recovered an empty box of ammunition. And a few feet away, they found several spent shotgun shell casings. Then, Sheriff Greg Kuhn from the nearby Grundy County Sheriff's Department arrived at the location. He believed he recognized the victim as a local resident by the name of Al Pinniger.
After I looked at the body, I felt that it might have been Al Pinniger, who I had dealt with in the past in Grundy County. Really couldn't tell for sure, but it just appeared to me that might be who it was.
Unsure what was evidence and what was roadside trash, investigators collected numerous items scattered around the area. They found and collected a small plastic clock. On the back was torn adhesive with tiny synthetic fibers clinging to it. They also located a single strand of brown leather lying in the middle of the road. Police hoped that somewhere among the debris were clues that could explain this brutal murder. At autopsy, the medical examiner confirmed that the victim had died as a result of several 12-gauge shotgun blasts. He'd been shot twice in the back and once in the face. The victim's fingerprints were lifted and then passed on to Harrison County Police. Investigators requested Al Pinniger's fingerprint card, which was on file in Grundy County. When they compared those prints with the ones taken from the homicide victim, they found a perfect match. Now, detectives from the Major Case Squad had to figure out who wanted Al Pinniger dead.
Major Case Squad.
Soon, they got their first break.
Okay, when did she report him missing?
Police learned that the victim had been reported missing a few days before his body was discovered.
Okay, thanks for calling.
And the report had been filed by his fiancée. Police immediately arranged for an interview. The victim's fiancée told detectives that she and Al had been living together for some time. She said that she last saw him a few hours before he went missing.
You need anything from the store?
She had left the house to go run a few errands.
All right, I'll see you later.
Al said he was going to cut the grass and do some work around the house. He hadn't mentioned any plans to leave that day.
5 days ago.
Recently, she had been trying to help him overcome a drug problem. He had been doing his best to stay far away from his drug-dealing friends.
John Middleton and
She suspected, however, that he had seen some of them that day. When she returned home later that afternoon, she passed a pickup truck coming out of her neighborhood. She didn't see Al in the truck, but she knew the vehicle belonged to a couple that he used to deal drugs with.
So he's been dealing with drugs?
She believed Al may have been ducking down to avoid being seen.
when I was driving.
When the fiancé arrived home, she discovered that Al and his 12-gauge shotgun were gone. The information provided police with their first real lead.
Okay, guys, here's what we got.
They ran a background check on the couple, identified as John Middleton and his girlfriend, Maggie Hodges.
Decomposed. You and Rodney.
Middleton had an extensive criminal record.
See if they
mostly involving drug-related offenses. To find out why he may have wanted to harm Al Pinniger, police tracked down Middleton's known associates. One informant described Middleton as an extremely unstable and violent person.
Hodges and Middleton.
He said that as a result of police efforts to crack down on local drug dealers, John Middleton had become increasingly paranoid. He threatened to kill people he did business with if he found out they were cooperating with authorities. No one doubted him for a minute. Everyone was afraid of him. All of the information led police to suspect that Middleton's paranoia had likely led to the murder of Al Pinniger. And they hoped that somewhere among the shotgun shells and the assorted litter collected from the crime scene was the means to prove it. Police in Harrison County, Missouri believed that a local drug dealer and his girlfriend were responsible for the brutal shotgun slaying of 29-year-old Alfred Pinniger. To prove it, investigators needed to physically link the suspects to the crime scene. Though several potential clues had been found there, an empty box of shotgun shells looked to be the most promising lead. A price sticker found on the box led investigators to the store where the ammo had originated. An employee there pulled recent sales records. According to receipts, several boxes of shells were bought on the day of the murder. The clerk recalled that two men and a woman had come in together to make the purchases. She also remembered something else. A few hours after the purchase, two of the three customers returned to the store. They had unused cartridges and wanted to return them for a refund. The clerk didn't recall seeing the other man who had been in with them earlier. When shown photographs, she picked out Al Pinniger, John Middleton, and Maggie Hodges as the three who bought the boxes of ammo earlier that day.
Did she come back the second time?
Yeah.
And she identified Middleton and Hodges as the two who came back to return the unused ammo. Though the evidence didn't prove murder, it was enough for police to obtain arrest warrants. Believing that Middleton and his girlfriend were capable of great violence, police cautiously approached the house they shared together. John Middleton was quickly subdued. Moments later, Maggie Hodges was also taken into custody. After the suspects were removed from the scene, police began searching for proof of murder. Inside Middleton's pickup truck, they collected a fringed brown leather jacket. As the search continued, technicians found a potential clue. Bethany Police Chief George Martz.
We took a piece of the dashboard from the Middleton truck that had a sticky substance on it, and on that sticky substance were fibers. Those fibers appeared to match the clock we found at the crime scene. So we removed a piece of the dash, the entire dash, and sent that to the lab for analysis.
All of the evidence was forwarded to the Missouri State Highway Patrol Crime Lab, located in Jefferson City. There, criminalist Kathleen Green worked the case. Almost immediately, she noticed that the fringes on the brown leather jacket appeared identical to a piece of brown leather found at the crime scene.
I looked at the jacket to see if there was any fringe missing from it, and did find an area where there was a piece of fringe missing. I then compared the question end of the fringe to the question area on the jacket to determine if it was originally attached to it.
Though the pieces lined up well, Green was unable to conclusively state that the piece of leather had in fact come from Middleton's jacket. She turned her attention to the stick-on clock found near Al Pinniger's body. When she compared the adhesive on the back of the clock to the adhesive stuck to Middleton's dashboard, she found numerous similarities.
It was the same size, it had the same coloring, they were both made of the same type of material.
When the torn edges of the two pieces were placed side by side under a comparison microscope, examiners found a match. Next, fibers found on the stick-on clock were compared to carpet samples collected from the vehicle. Criminalist Jenny Smith found one consistency after another.
We determined that the fiber from the clock face, this would have been considered the question fiber, was similar in physical and chemical composition to the fiber from the suspect vehicle. Therefore, we would conclude that this fiber, question fiber, could have come from this vehicle.
When confronted with the evidence, Middleton was uncooperative.
This is your opportunity to tell your side of the story. We know what the story is.
But his resistance didn't matter. Police had pieced together the motive behind the murder.
Do you think about this real long?
My belief is that Mr. Middleton thought Alfred Pinniger was about to rat him out to the police department and to law enforcement authorities, and Mr. Middleton was not going to allow that to happen. You're in some bad trouble.
But Middleton was wrong. The victim had made no attempt to contact authorities. Police believe that on the day of the murder, John Middleton and Maggie Hodges drove to Al Pinniger's house. They asked him to go target shooting, and he agreed. What he didn't know was that he was the intended target. At some point, however, that became clear. A scuffle started inside the car. Pinniger escaped, but he didn't get far. John Middleton was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Maggie Hodges pled guilty and was sentenced to 50 years in prison. It takes motive and opportunity to commit a murder. And it takes hard evidence to solve one. When clues are few, forensics experts provide the know-how to turn the most ordinary object into a material witness. In Northern California, a car crashes down an embankment in the dead of night. Rescue workers scramble to save a couple trapped inside. But the routine investigation takes an unexpected twist when details about the victims are revealed. Not far away, in Palo Alto, a woman is found dead at the bottom of the basement stairs. As detectives look into the accident, they begin to question the sequence of events. Sometimes, first impressions mask the truth. A tragic accident, a happy marriage, a solid alibi. In the face of murder, all these come under scrutiny. To solve the demanding cases, investigators must sift through the debris of shattered vows. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. El Dorado County, California. the Golden Country, where traffic is light and barely lit roads are the norm. On October 27, 1992, one of those roads offered up a deadly turn. Around 8 p.m., a man driving alone noticed swerving headlights in his rearview mirror and heard a crash. When he looked back, the car was gone. Fearing that someone was seriously injured, he turned around and pulled off to the side of the road. He saw the vehicle at the bottom of the embankment. He ran down to help. The woman sat motionless. Her companion sat dazed and in pain.
Fire emergency.
A car went over the embankment.
Are there people injured?
Yeah, there's 2 people inside, and I think the driver's dead. The other guy's hurt real bad.
Units from the Folsom Fire Department raced to the scene. Officers from the California Highway Patrol and other emergency personnel moved quickly to rescue the victims. Rescue workers carrying equipment helped each other down the steep embankment. Paramedics confirmed the woman was dead. The passenger identified himself as Mitch McLeese. He said he couldn't move his legs. Paramedics suspected internal injuries. When asked about the accident, he said he couldn't remember much. He told them he was a friend of the woman who was driving. Her driver's license identified her as Susan Moyer, a 52-year-old woman from El Dorado.
We're gonna help you out. We have to get you out of this car first, okay? Just try to relax.
McLeese said he must have fallen asleep. When he woke up, they were in the ditch. Paramedics rushed the passenger to Sacramento Medical Center for treatment. A deputy from the El Dorado Sheriff's Department arrived at Susan Moyer's home around 11 p.m. He told Ken Moyer his wife had been killed in a car accident. The officer asked questions, gathering information about Ken's wife, Susan, and her passenger, Mitch McLeese. Moyer said McLeese was one of his employees. He also told him that McLeese helped them move to California from Sarasota, Florida.
Today, so I can just start in the kitchen tomorrow?
Ken and Susan were newlyweds, and McLeese stayed on to do some work in their new home. That evening, Moyer had to leave for an appointment around 7:15 and couldn't take McLeese back to his hotel.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Susan offered to drive him when he was done.
Hey, Mitch.
Gentleman that was with
Moyer said when he returned home around 8:30, Susan still wasn't home, and he began to worry. He drove around searching for her. Moyer told the deputy he blamed himself for the accident. He said if he'd taken McLeese home, Susan would still be alive.
No, I left.
The next day, an autopsy was performed. X-rays revealed the victim's 4th and 5th cervical vertebrae had been fractured and dislocated. Susan Moyer had broken her neck. The victim's eyes were black and swollen, indicating Susan's head hit the steering wheel on impact. According to police reports, the car had rolled down the steep embankment. The coroner determined her injuries were consistent with the accounts. The death was ruled accidental. Susan's body was released to her husband. She was cremated and her remains sent to her hometown of Sarasota, Florida, for burial. Police are required to investigate all traffic fatalities and went to the hospital to follow up on passenger Mitch McLeese.
Do you mind if I actually take a look at that?
But the nurse informed the officer that McLeese wouldn't let the doctors perform any tests and had checked himself out hours earlier.
A few hours ago, he left a couple friends.
Against doctors' orders. At the El Dorado Sheriff's Office, Lieutenant Jim Roloff had questions. The only witness to the accident had left town, and it seemed suspicious.
Our seriously injured victim, who was supposedly in the hospital dying, has checked out and gone home to Washington, the state of Washington. So, at that point, things started not looking too good.
Lieutenant Roloff reviewed the autopsy report for anything out of the ordinary. He found nothing. But all that was about to change.
Lieutenant Roloff.
Hi, this is Detective Beecham from Sarasota.
In Sarasota, Florida, a detective from the Special Investigations Unit relayed information to Lieutenant Roloff from Susan Moyer's family. She said they didn't believe her death was an accident. Florida investigators told Roloff they conducted a preliminary background check into the Moyers.
Going to do a reconstruction on this.
They discovered Susan was recently awarded a $3.7 million settlement when her first husband was killed in a small plane crash. According to family members, Ken Moyer came into her life shortly after she received the money. This information raised suspicions.
Yeah.
Roloff and his team decided to re-examine the accident.
The first thing that had to be established is, how did this woman die? And was it, in fact, as a result of injuries suffered in the accident, or was it from some other means?
California Highway Patrol's major accident investigation team, known as MATE, was called in to help find an answer. At the scene, the investigators reconstructed the accident.
The next one?
They measured the slope of the embankment and the length of the tire tracks to learn exactly how the car ended up in the ditch. Paul Whiting headed the investigation.
We get an approximate speed of the vehicle, the amount of time that it took for it to come to a stop. From that, we can calculate the forces, the approximate forces that the vehicle experienced as it dissipated its energy coming to a stop.
Broken branches would also help gauge the force of the car's descent. The greater the damage, the harder and faster the car tumbled. Though the trees showed scars of the accident, Whiting and his team found that the damage was minimal.
We determined there simply wasn't enough force generated to the vehicle and thus to the occupants of the vehicle to produce the deadly injuries that she received.
The investigation team now needed to closely examine the car, which had been towed to the impound lot the night of the accident. Paul Whiting was puzzled. He found the car's condition particularly unusual.
We could find no significant damage to the interior of the car. We checked the steering wheel. It wasn't bent in any direction. There was no marks in the dashboard. The pedals were all intact. There was nothing on the interior of the car that would have suggested a significant human impact with any of those structures.
Investigators checked for blood or fibers to determine if Susan Moyer or her passenger had hit the windshield. no evidence was found in the glass. Whiting concluded the glass shattered from the stress of the collision and not because one of the passengers hit their heads on the windshield. The exterior of the car also showed little serious impact.
The damage to the left front is the only damage that is significant at all. At the most, it would represent a speed change of 10 miles an hour. Now, the forces in a 10-mile-an-hour speed change would be comparable to backing into a light post from a parked position. So it's not the kind of forces that we would expect to see fractured necks or death-producing injuries from.
Whiting and his team found no evidence the car had rolled over or that it was involved in a serious accident. Lieutenant Roloff read the mate report and grew more skeptical.
I got a favor. As you start down this road, everything you're developing says that this accident is not what it appears to be.
Authorities now believed Susan Moyer's death was not an accident. But proving it would not be easy. Susan's body had been cremated and all physical evidence of her death destroyed. In El Dorado, California, Susan Moyer was found dead at the scene of a car crash. After reconstructing the accident, investigators now believed she was murdered. And they discovered there was a possible motive. Police grew suspicious after they learned the victim's new husband stood to inherit almost $4 million upon her death. Detective Sergeant Hal Lamb of the Homicide Division discussed the mate findings with Lieutenant Jim Roloff.
They were telling us that the forces involved in this accident weren't sufficient to cause the broken neck.
Because Susan Moyers had been cremated, Detective Sergeant Lamb had to rely on the original autopsy report and details observed at the scene.
Fortunately, the night of the accident, we had a sheriff's corner investigator that had gone out and took a series of photographs of Susan inside of the vehicle, and so we had those to work with.
The photographs revealed the position of the body, blood patterns on the victim's face, and bruising around the eyes. Armed with this new information, investigators turned to the Sacramento Forensic Services Department and Chief Medical Examiner Gregory Schmunk. He reviewed the reports, photographs, and eyewitness accounts of emergency personnel at the scene.
The description that there was bruising around both of the eyes within seconds to minutes after the accident, as described by the paramedic on the scene, would be very unusual. It takes some time for that bruising to occur because the blood has to seep through those soft tissues. That indicated to me that the death had occurred prior to her driving off the road.
The photographs also showed dried blood patterns on the victim's face. These blood stains ran down the side of the victim's face toward her ear. But the effects of gravity after the accident should have made the blood drip down the front of her face.
The blood pattern on the body was not consistent with the way she was positioned in the vehicle.
Schmunk closely examined the autopsy report in light of the California Highway Patrol's analysis of the accident.
There was a fracture of the mid-neck that was inconsistent with any type of fracture that I'd ever seen in a motor vehicle accident such as the type that Susan was in. There was no rollover, there was no significant impact. So the location of the fracture was unusual for that type of incident. I'd concluded that the fracture of the neck and therefore the cause of Susan Moyer's death was not due to a motor vehicle accident.
Now they needed to find out exactly how this woman died and who wanted her dead.
It's worth it, though, I think.
They turned to her husband, Ken Moyer, and the only survivor of the crash, Mitch McLeese. But McLeese had abruptly left town after the accident. And Ken Moyer had returned to his home in Florida, where he owned a sporting goods store. Police spoke to those closest to the couple. They were hoping to find out more about their relationship. Close friend Kyle Dallinger lived nearby.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Kyle told police Ken Moyer was distraught the day after the accident.
Sir, what are you doing?
Moyer asked him if he would drive him to the hospital to pick up his friend Mitch McLeese, who was checking out. The neighbors said he saw Ken Moyer hand McLeese a plane ticket.
Yeah, I overheard a phone
He was
call.
told Mitch McLeese was not going home, but relocated to a small town outside of Seattle.
Did he make any comments to you about this?
Given this new information, the police were beginning to uncover a murderous plot.
Perhaps he should leave town, take a vacation.
We really felt that Ken Moyer was the brains behind this whole thing. We thought that it was a homicide for money at that point, and we felt that Mitch McLeese was just the hired hand.
Detectives went to Washington to interview McLeese. When detectives identified themselves, he was shaken.
Yeah, actually, we're detectives from El Dorado County Sheriff's Department. I'm Detective Hal Lamb. This is Detective Bill Wilton. We're here to talk to you about the accident you were involved in with Susan Moyer.
McLeese stuck to the story that Susan was driving and he had fallen asleep. He said he woke up just as the car plunged down the embankment and didn't know what caused the accident.
Yeah?
That's been bothering me still, actually.
Because of everything they had uncovered, detectives knew they weren't getting the whole story.
And obviously Susan can't tell us what happened. He was lying.
I don't remember anything else.
There's no question that he was lying. But we didn't really have enough physical evidence to arrest him at that time.
They needed more. So Lieutenant Roloff sent detectives to Sarasota, the Moyers' hometown, to talk to the people who knew them best.
I made a list of some individuals that I feel warrant some further questioning.
They met the local investigators who had been gathering information about the Moyers and their employee, Mitch McLeese. The detectives learned about an affair Ken Moyer was having with a woman by the name of Betty Ann Brown. Detectives interviewed Brown, who admitted she'd been seeing Ken for the last 2 years.
I know he was very upset.
She was shocked when she heard he was getting married,
And I'm being interviewed.
but he assured her that his marriage would not interfere with their relationship.
This card's okay?
Absolutely.
And Ken Moyer kept seeing Betty Ann on a regular basis.
Don't you want that? Yeah. Once, I believe.
She admitted that they'd had an intimate encounter just before the wedding. The day of the funeral, they had an intimate encounter after the funeral, and she even gave us the location and the time of the motel that she met with him.
Detectives began interviewing employees at Ken's sporting goods store. And it seemed as if everyone had a similar story to tell. According to everyone who knew him, Ken's marriage to Susan was not about love.
We learned from all the people that we had interviewed that it was apparent that Ken Moyer had married Susan for her money, and that Ken really didn't care for Susan.
I asked him.
He had told one of his employees, it was a question-answer thing, Eddie, do you know why someone gets married? And Eddie says, for love, and Ken says, no, it's for money.
Police now had a clear motive, but the crime and the crime scene still remained unclear. They now believed the accident was staged to cover up Susan's murder. But linking Ken Moyer and Mitch McLeese to the killing would take more than motive. It would take proof in the form of forensic evidence. California detectives began investigating an accident, but ended up uncovering a murder. They believed Ken Moyer had paid one of his employees to kill his wife, Susan. Although the circumstantial evidence was compelling, they had no physical proof. Investigators Lamb and Roloff now believed they knew how Susan had died, but they still had no direct evidence to prove that Moyer or McLeese had killed her.
Go over, take a look at it, and see where we want to go from there.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
4 months after the crash, a newspaper article prompted a local handyman to contact police. The worker told detectives Ken Moyer had hired him to regrout some tiles in his foyer.
First layer, it wouldn't be a problem, and just relay everything, but he wanted the grout and everything taken out, completely redone.
Okay, Chuck, here's the spots I want you to
Moyer
look at.
explained that he'd spilled cherry cough medicine, and it had penetrated the grout.
You know, these aren't that bad.
The worker told Moyer that he didn't need to replace the grout, just scrape and regrout the stained portions.
All the way to the cement. All this grout out, this whole section here.
Just because I was concerned about it. So
And Mr. Moyer insisted that he remove all the grout and replace it all. And he told us that as he was removing that grout, that Mr. Moyer was sitting there with a vacuum, vacuuming up the stained grout.
He described precisely where the tiles were located. Since the tiles were porous, he felt confident that some of the red stains still remained.
This is the area by the door that we're really concerned with. The tile guy, this is the area that he came in and pointed out to us. Some area right in here.
Police obtained a warrant to search the Moyers' house. Faye Ann Springer, a criminalist for Sacramento County, examined the tiles for bloodstains. A preliminary examination revealed no outward signs of blood.
Okay, I think what we'll do is we'll spray in this area first and then work our way down towards the door.
Come here.
Working systematically, Springer sprayed the area with a chemical called fluorescein, which glows in the presence of minute quantities of blood.
Oh, we're getting a little weak reaction in a couple of places here. It doesn't identify blood, it only gives you areas of interest. And there were at least 2 areas of interest in the entryway. What we did then is request that those tiles be actually physically removed because the amount of blood was not visible to the eye, so we wanted to look at the sides of the tile to see if blood may have seeped between the actual ceramic tiles and in through the grout.
The tiles were brought to the lab and did in fact test positive for blood. Springer then had to determine whether or not it was Susan Moyer's. And she wasn't sure this could be done.
The amount of material was marginal for testing. It's very difficult to test blood stains that are in grout or cement, but I thought there might be enough present on the tiles that they could get enough material, DNA material, out of it.
Springer was right. The sample did contain enough DNA for testing. A comparison to the victim's DNA proved the blood on the tiles was Susan Moyer's. On March 27, 1993, Ken Moyer was arrested in Sarasota, Florida, and returned to California. Investigators pieced together the events that led to Susan's murder. Ken Moyer had courted and married her for money. After the wedding, he moved her to California, far away from loved ones who would ask too many questions. Moyer then enlisted Mitch McLeese and gave him money to help him carry out the murder. On the night of October 27, 1992, McLeese crept up behind the unsuspecting victim and broke her neck. The force of the brake caused her nose to bleed and blood to spatter on the floor. Her death was instant. Detectives believe Ken Moyer helped McLeese put his wife's body into the car.
And I think that Mitch McLeese sat in the passenger seat and reached over and steered the vehicle and probably operated the gas with his left foot.
Ken Moyer was convicted of the first-degree murder of Susan Moyer. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Mitch McLeese was also convicted of first-degree murder and received an identical sentence. Some killers will go to great lengths to hide their true nature and conceal their crimes. But in Palo Alto, California, it is the secret itself that unmasks a killer. Palo Alto is an affluent bedroom community of San Francisco in the heart of Silicon Valley. This quiet area can offer a sense of security and a refuge away from urban life. But sometimes danger is closer than it looks.
911 emergency.
On May 5th, 2000, police dispatch received a 911 call. A woman had fallen down the stairs and was not breathing. The dispatcher alerted the Palo Alto police and the rescue squad, who raced to the scene. Moments later, police arrived at the residence of Mary Ann and William Slater. Despite all the rescue efforts, it was too late.
That's all we got.
Mary Ann Slater could not be resuscitated.
251 dispatch. Go ahead and dispatch me a coroner and a detective at this location.
Two classes today. There's one at 10:20.
Detective Mike Denson spoke with the victim's husband.
So
William Slater told the investigator that nothing unusual happened that day.
I thought she might still be.
He said after their morning jog, Mary Ann left around 10 o'clock to teach a piano class. And he left the house an hour later to survey a new building site.
Have a good day.
He stayed at the site until 1 p.m.
For work,
When he left to meet some friends for lunch, William said he received a call from his wife's work.
I came back to the house. Hello?
She had not shown up for her second
Oh,
class.
that's strange. She was at home when I left. Did you try her cell phone?
He grew concerned and called home several times, but there was no answer.
Told me that she had
William also told Detective Denson it was not unusual for Mary Ann to go home in between classes.
There she was at the bottom of the stairs.
When he returned home,
I
he
ran
discovered
down.
the tragic accident.
Music teacher.
He said that he looked down the stairs and she was laying on the stairs and was not responsive. He told me that he believed that she had fallen down the stairs, and he noticed that she was wearing these particular shoes, and he knew that she had fallen in those shoes previously. And so he speculated that she was carrying something down the stairs, tripped on the shoes and fell down the stairs.
By all accounts, it looked like a terrible accident. Mary Ann, home alone, had tripped, hit her head, and died.
Bell up there on the steps, other places. So, and she is.
An initial assessment of the scene indicated that the victim appeared to have been doing laundry when she fell. Like all unattended deaths, Mary Ann Slater's body was sent to the coroner's lab for autopsy. Assistant Medical Examiner Coroner Diane Vertis performed the examination and quickly became suspicious.
See this? See the neck? Well, initially we looked for injuries consistent with the story that she fell down a flight of stairs. What we found was much different than what we were led to believe.
The external examination revealed 7 separate wounds to all different parts of the head.
What's very important about this is that these lacerations were not consistent with a single event. They were much more consistent with multiple blows to the head. And you can feel the skull fracture.
What about the neck?
We also did find some injuries on the hands, and the injuries on the hands were more consistent with what we call defensive wounds. Okay, we got a 1/4-inch laceration there.
The evidence suggested Marianne Slater was beaten to death while trying to fend off her attacker. An internal examination revealed additional injuries to Marianne's neck.
There were signs of strangulation. This, of course, was completely contrary to a simple fall down the stairs. This is something that we saw some signs of externally and became more evident on the internal exam.
Dr. Vertis called in Dr. Gregory Schmunk, the chief medical examiner coroner for Santa Clara County.
I first became involved at the investigation on a Friday evening when I got a phone call from one of my investigators that a woman had fallen downstairs. I told her to proceed as usual with her investigation. And the next thing that I heard about the case was when I heard the autopsy findings, that those autopsy findings were not consistent with a fall down the stairs.
After reviewing the crime scene photographs, Dr. Schmunk agreed with Dr. Vertis' findings that Marianne's injuries did not occur from falling.
That examination made me conclude that the majority of the blows to the back of the head were not with a striking object, but were more likely the head being impacted against a straight surface or possibly a right-angled surface.
Marianne Slater's death was no accident. This was murder. In Palo Alto, Marianne Slater was found dead in her house from what appeared to be an accidental fall. But an autopsy revealed injuries inconsistent with this initial assessment. It now looked as though Marianne was beaten and strangled. Detective Mike Denson of the Palo Alto Police Department believed a recent rash of burglaries in the neighborhood might provide a possible scenario.
Over the last 6 months, there had been several residential burglaries in the Southgate neighborhood. That was a consideration of mine as I began this investigation.
He checked previous reports of burglaries. Denson theorized the burglar might have been surprised by Marianne and killed her.
That's what I came up with also.
To test the theory, investigators secured a search warrant and returned to the house. They checked the exterior perimeter, looking for signs of a break-in. There were no signs of forced entry. Inside the house, forensic examiners needed to pinpoint the exact location of her death. They started with the basement steps. Forensic technicians used the chemical luminol to locate the presence of blood. If Marianne had actually fallen and hit her head, there would be a definite pattern of blood. There wasn't any spatter on the stairs at all. From the basement, they backtracked and examined other parts of the house.
Sarge, I didn't see any blood spatter.
Since the basement door opened into the kitchen, they began there.
We found some blood spatter and some dilute blood stain in the kitchen of the house. I knew at that time that we were going to have to do luminol to bring up a cleaned up crime scene, and so that was our next course of action, was to bring the luminol experts in to spray for luminol and detect blood stain.
If a room hid a bloody secret, luminol would find it. And in this case, it did exactly that. someone had tried to cover up a violent act. Chief Medical Examiner Gregory Schmunk.
The luminol test revealed that there was extensive blood throughout the house, especially that kitchen and an adjacent bathroom. It looked like there had been a primary crime scene in the kitchen where she had been assaulted, and then the assailant had later gone to the bathroom and probably washed up.
There was a huge amount of blood discovered, and no amount of cleaning could hide it. The kitchen floor glowed with the telltale signs of murder. Upon closer examination of the glow patterns, a partial left shoe print emerged. Mary Ann Slater had been killed in the kitchen, and her body moved to the bottom of the stairs afterward. A burglar would have no reason to clean up a crime scene and stage a murder to look like an accident. Mary Ann probably knew her killer. As a matter of routine, police needed to rule out Mary Ann's husband, William, as a suspect. They first checked his alibi, starting with his phone calls.
Do a photo, so I'd like you to photograph each of the calls that were received in this box, collect it, and then collect this address book for me as well.
Got it.
Thank you.
Hoping for anything that might lead to a break in the case, investigators collected the caller ID box from the Slaters' telephone, along with Mary Ann's address book. At the State Crime Lab, a DNA profile was made from the blood found in the Slaters' kitchen. The profile was then compared to DNA extracted from Mary Ann's body during autopsy. To no one's surprise, they matched. Police canvassed the Slaters' neighborhood to see if anyone had witnessed anything suspicious on the day of the murder. One neighbor told Sergeant Denson that a silver truck blocked the alleyway behind the Slater house around 12:30 that day.
It was about noon.
She paid particular attention to that vehicle because it was wide enough and the street was narrow enough that it made it uneasy for her to get around it. So she noticed it and made a mental note of it at that time.
She couldn't go anywhere for half an hour. Police knew William Slater drove a silver truck.
In the house all day?
This would indicate that William was actually in the neighborhood at the time of the murder, not at the work site as he had told detectives earlier. An officer searched the construction area for any evidence or anyone who could corroborate William's story. He found nothing. Across the street, the officer noticed a driving range that had a fairly good view of the vacant lot. He questioned the clerk at the golf club to see if she had seen anyone over there on the day in question. The clerk said that she knew William, and although she was working that afternoon, she hadn't seen him or anyone else there. Detective Denson looked closer at the rest of William's story. The Slaters' caller ID registered a call from Mary Ann's work and several calls from William's cell phone. Denson tracked the location of the calls.
When you turn a cell phone on or hit send to make a call, the cell phone will search for the strongest signal or the closest cell site to put the call through. Since he was telling me he was on 101 at Woodside Road, he theoretically should have been hitting a cell site close to that location. In fact, he was hitting a cell site that was close to his house.
It looked as if police could not eliminate William Slater as a murder suspect. His alibi was falling apart. Police believed the man who just a few days ago seemed like the grieving widower
Just as we were looking around,
was actually a killer.
on the bell up there, on the steps.
But to prove it, investigators knew they needed to physically link him to the accident. Palo Alto investigators believed William Slater had staged an accident to cover up the murder of his wife. Now they had to prove it. The autopsy revealed that Marianne had been beaten and strangled, and William's alibi had fallen apart. But he didn't appear to have a motive. By all accounts, the Slaters were happy. They recently celebrated their 25th anniversary and had 2 children together. To learn more, Detective Denson called Marianne's friends and family.
My intention was to call all the friends that I could discover in the address book and see if I could find potential motive. And I was just calling up and asking them if they could think of anything that would help with the investigation. And ultimately found a friend that was aware of an affair that occurred some 20 years ago.
Edward Dale had been a friend of Marianne's for most of her life.
Hi, how you doing, sir? This is Sergeant Mike Denson with Palo Alto Police Department.
Denson interviewed Dale about his relationship with Marianne and William.
About 15 years.
He told the detective he had an affair with Marianne. During the time of the affair, Marianne became pregnant with Dale's son. William Slater raised the boy as his own, never suspecting he was not the father of the child. The last time Dale saw Marianne, she told him she planned to reveal their secret to her son on his graduation day. Dale said he was relieved. The secret had gone on too long. The family secret provided police with a possible motive. And Detective Denson did a little more digging.
I did a thorough investigation using the FBI Financial Analyst Unit in Virginia, and I had them do the full financial records check.
He learned the Slaters had money problems, and their finances were dwindling away.
He was doing his own business, but it was not bringing in very much income, so we basically found them to be broke.
Denson learned through friends that Marianne was not aware of their financial problems. William Slater seemed to have many secrets, but investigators still had no physical evidence linking him to murder. Police obtained a search warrant to examine the vehicle he had been driving the day his wife was killed. The truck was impounded, and forensic technicians scoured the interior for evidence. Stashed underneath the front seat was a T-shirt. A stain that appeared to be blood was discovered. The shirt was bagged and marked as evidence. A search of the back seat revealed a pair of athletic shoes. The technician noticed several red smudges on them. The items were sent to the state crime lab for analysis. Samples from the stains on both the shoes and the shirt tested positive for human blood. To determine whose blood it was, DNA was extracted from the samples, following careful procedure to avoid contamination of the evidence. A computer-aided comparison was made between the samples and the DNA of the victim, Marianne Slater. They matched. But a small amount of blood might not hold up in court and could possibly be explained away. A print expert examined the left shoe found in William's truck to see if it matched the tread pattern found on the print in Slater's kitchen. After the shoe was inked, a sample print was carefully made and a transparency was created. A comparison revealed both prints had identical tread and matching wear patterns. The prints were made by the shoes in the truck. It was the break police needed. On May 19, 2000, 2 weeks after the murder of his wife, police arrested William Slater. Although he initially denied any involvement, after several hours of questioning, William confessed to killing his wife. He flew into a rage after his wife revealed her infidelity. At first, he tried to strangle her, but when she fought back, he kicked her to death. He then placed her body at the foot of the basement stairs to stage the accident. And returned to clean up the blood in the kitchen.
His life was shaken to the max, and I believe that he killed her as a result of that. In addition, they were financially unstable at this point, and his whole life was about to change or changing.
William Slater was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Killers who are closest to their victims often believe they can cover up their crimes and fool investigators. But more often, forensic evidence is discovered, unmasking the deceit and bringing the perpetrators to justice.